Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Powerful Man Show. I'm your host, Doug Holt, with my special guest and good friend, Shaun Zetlin. Shaun, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Doug, for having me.
Shaun, we were talking offline, like, how do I introduce you? So, Shaun, first and foremost, is a father, a husband, a serial entrepreneur, author of books, a fitness expert, internationally recognized. I mean, we can go on and on. And Shaun, we've known each other for what, 5, 6 years now, I think.
Great. Yes. It's been an honor.
It's been great. And Shaun has come into one of our private groups, even when COVID first came back last year, and offered his expertise just to share. One of Shaun's passions, which we'll talk about today, is clearly he's really recognized as one of the leaders in the fitness industry. He's a celebrity trainer, so to speak, but he's also known for his ability to go above and beyond the physical and tap into both the psychological and the emotional aspects of what makes us tick, and how do you get past these self-sabotaging behaviors that we get. So we're going to dive into a little bit of that today. So Shaun, thanks again for being here, man.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So Shaun, let's walk through, because I know a lot of the guys listening to this, a lot of them are married or maybe recently divorced or separated. They're somewhere along their journey, and I don't want to use those labels, but over time, for a lot of guys, you start to get in your mid 30s, your 40s or so, and maybe you start to let yourself go a little bit and you start join the gym, or maybe you're going to start running yourself. But as you start to make progress, or for a lot of men, then it's almost like one step forward, two steps back.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about that and what some of these guys can do and get to the root of this issue.
I'd be honored. I mean, I think the big thing is that when you're a father and you're a husband, these are big things. I mean, it's one, and no disrespect for anyone that's single, but as you take the journey into parenthood, and when you're a partner to somebody, that is a lot of energy and a lot of work to do it successfully. I mean, we need to say that off the bat,
Yep.
Especially if and Doug and I both have young kids. I mean, if you have young kids at home, they require a lot of attention, they acquire a lot of love. And it's beautiful if you have the opportunity to do that and be a part of that, obviously, on a daily basis. So, you think about it, all right, you're a husband, and you want to be the best husband you can be to your wife or your spouse. And then at the same time, you're a father. So you want to be there for your kids. You want to give them everything that they need. And kids, young kids especially, require lots of emotion. And where do you come in? And let's not forget, if you're an entrepreneur or you're trying to run a business or you have a job, you want to be successful at that job. So now you're sort of juggling these three balls. And where do you come in? And normally, we sort of put ourselves last, right? And if you
Absolutely.
put yourself last and then you start looking at yourself, it's that old adage, I got to fill my cup before I can fill somebody else's, and if you're not giving yourself what you need, you are not giving yourself everything that you need to be your best self. How can you be all these other things? I mean, it really has to start with yourself.
And it really does. And for most men, right, they start off, we're providers. We fill everybody
Yeah.
else's cup first. We make sure everybody else is okay, the
Mhm.
kid's okay, or
Yeah.
my wife okay. And then we're so depleted, we have nothing to put out, and it becomes a vicious cycle we fall into.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, my wife and I have this term we use. It's called 80 boxes. And 80 boxes because if you can imagine, I'm becoming a father for the first time, and we moved the day my first daughter was born. Of course, we didn't plan it that way. She happened to come that day. So what could we do? So thankfully, we had friends in the area. They helped move us. We were at the hospital. We come back to this beautiful little girl who's like 2 days old, and it's my first child. So I'm learning as I go. My wife is learning as she goes, and we're left with 80 boxes to unpack in this apartment. 80
Oh,
boxes.
man.
So this is the thing I have with my wife. We say 80 boxes, meaning, we're going to be a team. And so, I mean, this is a whole other conversation, of course, but, having a partnership, having a teammate is everything. I mean, you need to be on the same page. You got to work together, especially obviously if you're trying to better yourself. So that's the term we use about 80 boxes here at home. So when I'm with, the one thing I'll say is, when I'm running a business and I'm remote, my wife's job is remote, and we have our kids on the weekends and we don't have childcare to help us, I need to get my workout in, or I need to get my meditation, my journaling, things that I do for myself. We need to give each other those times. So it's really important to be a partner to somebody, to give each other the time that you need to help grow.
Absolutely. And it's really people will spend hours trying to invest in the stock market or invest in, areas of growth financially. But how often do we actually spend that time investing in ourselves, our number one asset?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, to get back to the original question, it's, well, how do I obtain my fitness goals or goals in general? Like when I'm working with somebody, obviously in the fitness field, and a new client will come to me and they'll say, these are things I want to work on. And it could be something like, okay, I have a bad back, or my knee aches, or my shoulder shot, or I have a torn labrum, and all these things. But then the other thing is, I want to be in shape. I want to have the energy to, let's say, be active with my kids, because we know how active, right, our children are, especially at a young age. And so my follow up question is, what have you done in the past? And then I listen. I think it's so important to really listen, really hear somebody's story, and really do that deep dive, really do that closed reading of what somebody's trying to say to you. And if they say to you excuses like, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but if they say to you things like, well, I don't have time, or I don't like to work out, or whatever it is, these are certain choices. I like to think that humbly I can change the mentality when it comes to movement. Um, but I think the idea of self sabotage, we all have that to a certain degree. We
Mhm.
all are our worst enemies. It's always going to be you versus you. Um, but I think for somebody, when they're first learning about themselves and they're really open to learning about themselves and why something hasn't worked in the past and how it can work in the future, we really need to take a good long look at ourselves and really ask ourselves why. Why hasn't it really worked? And if we don't know, then we need to seek help. We need to seek a professional, a mentor such as yourself, or somebody like in my field, where let's get a little help. And it's hard because you have to be supremely open for it. But if you're open to it, if you're open to that self improvement, man, the sky is the limit.
It really is. And
Yeah.
so, when you're talking about, I know you wrote a whole book on emotional fitness. I want to dive into that in a minute. But, I know a couple of the guys that are listening to this right now, and they're like, okay, Shaun, that's great. That's awesome that you and your wife have 80 boxes. But my wife, we're not on that same page, right? We haven't been on that same page in years. And it seems to me that every time I go out to exercise or whatever it is, take care of myself, I feel like either, she's sabotaging me
Hmm.
or something comes up. I start my running program, getting ready for the New York City Marathon.
Yeah.
And then, 3, 4 weeks into it, all of a sudden I start missing one workout, then two, then three, then four, and
Yes.
work gets in the way. What do you say to that person?
Oh, yes, and I'm glad you touched on this because I said this to a client actually yesterday. In fact, I said, he had gone on vacation and he was like, "Oh man, it's so hard, to get started again." And I was like, "Yes, you're right. It is hard to get started again. It's also really easy to start again as well." So we're shifting the mentality, and to say out loud, when it comes to the 80 boxes mentality, that's just something that happens overnight. I mean, just like everything else, everything takes work, and it's really important. Again, if my wife says to me, "This is what I need," and I tell her this is what I need, it's so important to really be there for your partner. Again, I just want to illustrate that and really listen again about what it is that somebody really, really needs to be there for them. Easier said than done, but as we all know, because we all can have that mentality of I need to get my stuff done or I need to be there for myself. But it's so important to get back in that regard. But for the clients that I'm working with for the first time, or somebody even that I've been with for a very, very long time, it's so important to get back to, okay, we know about the why. It's been talked about, constantly, the why, the why, the why. I want to lose 20 pounds. Why will I have a wedding coming up? um, I don't think the why really lasts. It doesn't really last because it's just a want. We really have to go back into what is the need. As human beings, I feel like when we are really at our best is when we feel that urgency. Okay, I
Mhm.
need to do this. I need to do this. I need to make these changes for me versus I want to do these changes for me. That's a simple word. It's a very simple word, but it's a powerful word. The idea of need versus want, which is why I mentioned needs when it comes to your spouse, tying everything together. Um, but the other thing is, it's the really, really important thing is that as you're working with somebody, and I know in my line, when they're open to the self improvement and they can kind of go down to the deeper dive and say, you know, I want to lose the weight, or I want to have more energy, or whatever their goal is. When they can really go into the deeper dive of why they need to do it, it's amazing what comes up, and it also really shocks that individual as well. And this
Absolutely.
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree with you 100%. And guys listening to this or watching this, I want you guys to take notice of a couple things here, right? There's a reason Shaun is a world-class trainer and works with elite people around the world. It's not because he knows what a labrum is. There's thousands of people that know the muscles of the body, but it's the psychology and understanding the emotional triggers and how do we get ourselves to respond in such a manner. And so guys, listen to what Shaun is saying, because these things, you're going to want to go back and listen again to what he just said, because there's nuances in the languaging that you're using that I think are really important as you're replying to your relationship, but also to your fitness goals and how we achieve those. So anyway, I don't want to interrupt your
No,
flow, but
you were beautiful to say that. And you touched on a word which I think is very crucial to this conversation. And it's a word that we all experience. And again, I say this kindly to everyone listening, nobody gets out of this world unscathed, because we all have triggers, because we all have a childhood, and we all have a subconscious.
yes.
So, if you think about the trigger, I have clients that suffer through triggers. I myself have suffered through triggers. And we look at those as, why me? Why me? Why do I have to go through this? Haven't I been through enough? Why me? We feel like the victim. But triggers are so important, because triggers are the teacher. They are a teacher, and they allow us the opportunity to grow, to really once again become our authentic selves. And it's so important to pay attention to these triggers. And they can be painful, and they can be raw, and it is certainly hard work. And nobody said this was easy, but I think it's so important. In fact, it's more than important, Doug. I mean, really, at the end of the day, you really have no choice. You have no choice but to pay attention to the triggers, because the universe has a very, very fabulous way of saying, oh, you weren't listening? I'm going to keep pulling you in that direction until you listen, until you see. I will show you the same lesson over and over again until you learn it. And once you learn it and you overcome it, yes, you become a better version of yourselves. And there may be other triggers down the line that may be also raw, and maybe also, very hurtful and powerful. But at the same time, it's an opportunity to continue to grow into your best self and to become a whole person. So important.
I love it. And so true. And Shaun, do you find that the men that you work with,
Mhm.
the high performers, do you find that, well, I won't frame this differently, but do you find that they have different obstacles that they face when approaching their health and wellness? Or, and I'll ask it another way, is are there certain tricks or techniques that those guys use that allow them to perform at a high level?
Great question. Great couple questions. So to answer the first question, yes, there is, when people are high performers in their jobs or in other areas of their lives, they usually want to give their all with me. That is fantastic. However, the idea of perfection is a very, and I just talked about this recently too. The idea of perfection is very, very intense and can be a huge detriment. And it's a couple things. It's, well, if we're doing a new exercise and they do it incorrectly, or they have to do the conditioning part, or they don't do their best that they think, it doesn't matter what I think, it really matters what they think. And they say, well, I did 15 push-ups, but I really wanted to do 20, and I failed at 15. I'm a failure. No, you're not a failure. You did 15. We rest a few moments. We finish it up with the final five. To them, they failed. They don't want to do it again, or they don't want to try anything new. It becomes such a detriment, in other areas also of their lives, where again, I have to be a perfect 10, and that's just so untrue. And again, that mentality again goes back into, their childhood, of the subconscious of either they were taught with a parent or a guardian or a counselor, perfection really equates to self-love. It does not. But that's what they learned. And so when I'm with them, the idea here, the psychology behind it is, okay, first of all, be proud that you showed up today. Be proud that you did 15 push-ups with awesome form. And then be proud that you only took about, what, 2 or 3 seconds, maybe 4 or 5, whatever, doesn't matter. But you finished it out and you're giving me total 20. That's what matters. You did that 20 at the very, very end, as opposed to I failed at 15. And so the idea here is that we want to make perfection a positive word, where I want to, I want people to be ambitious, and I want them to be their best selves, and I want to inspire them and motivate them, to reach their higher self, but not when it comes to a part of self-harm, and it comes to self-loathing, all these things that and shame. I mean, really shame, because that's what we're talking about. So that's one. And then to answer the second part, which I think is also equally important, it's, the people that are these high performers, and I see them, how, I see them early in the morning at 7 a.m. and they just have to have all cylinders firing, and they want to just give their all in every aspect of their life, which is fantastic. And then what happens is eventually they hit a wall, because they have given energy and given energy and given energy, and they haven't put it back, so they're imbalanced. So the idea of balance is a very, very important word, because obviously burnout is also a thing. And so I would like to practice with these clients, especially my male clients. One, if you're become a perfectionist, and you haven't, you're creating all this self-loathing and shame, we need to dig deeper and experience why you feel this way, why you are attaching, performance and perfection to self-love. So where does that come back to? And then the other important aspect in all this is that, okay, you are showing up and you're giving all you can and you're being all these things to different people in your life, but you need to be more to yourself. And we got to
Mm.
create better balance. So important.
It is so important. And one of, you and I share many passions together, but one of them is that we talk about here on the show quite often is that, the cause of death for men our age, men, I think it's men basically 11 to 44, somewhere in there. The
Mhm.
number two cause of death is suicide. Now,
Right.
the number one cause is accidental death. And there's speculation that a large percentage of that is suicide. And they do so to make sure their family has insurance benefits. That's the guy who purposely swerves off the road and hits the telephone pole or off the cliff.
Right.
And a lot of that comes down to what we're talking about here, right? You got high performers, and we see
Yeah.
this a lot in the Powerful Man that have driven themselves to this successful place in business in their lives by beating themselves up.
Yep.
And that works only so much for only so long, right?
Yeah.
And it's like driving a car on fumes. Eventually, you got to go to the gas station and fill up, and it's just not going to work anymore. That car is going to break down.
Mhm.
So when you see that coming in with your clients that you're working with, because it sounds like a lot of them do, how do you get them to use fitness as an emotional tool to reset those batteries?
Ooh, tremendous question. And I think for men, before I answer it, I think for men, it's so important to really match the energy because, and I hate to stereotype, and I'm certainly not trying to, because my goal is to have men really talk about their emotions and feelings and be comfortable with it. And I
Mhm.
guess the stigma in society would be, well, I'm not comfortable talking about it, or I don't know how to talk about it. And
Mhm.
when certainly when some of my clients talk to me, I like to say, well, it sounds like you're feeling, you're feeling depressed, or it sounds like you're feeling some anxiety. And they can't even coin it themselves because number one, I think it's scary for them to admit these emotions, and number two, they're just not sure what they're feeling.
Sure.
So well, to make it a shorter answer, I start with five principles, and they've really helped me. And I should say, I'm, just like the hair club for men. I've been through stuff as well. I've been through trauma as well, and it's so important that when you're a trauma survivor like I am, it's really important to understand that you have to have certain empathy. So I feel like I'm a prime candidate to help these men. Number one, because I've been through it, I've gotten the help, I've done the research, I've done the work, and when I was researching with emotional fitness and writing that book, that number was shocking to me because everything you're saying, by the way, I researched and read myself. And I was like, well, I couldn't help to think that accidents were also part of the suicide rate, but it also was super shocking to think that. And you think about, kids, we're kids, 10 years old, 11 years old, you're a kid, you're still a kid at 18.
Mhm.
And so the idea here is that, well, vulnerability, to me, it all starts there. It's got to start, and the conversation has to start there. And what I just said to you, I'm a trauma survivor. Well, some men would never even admit that. I'm not going
Mhm.
to admit that. That's going to show Doug weakness. It's going to show Doug's listeners or watchers weakness. So I'm not going to take any advice from Shaun. No, it's the opposite. It's the opposite because I've been through stuff, I've healed, and I'm able to help somebody. But the idea of being open to talking about the idea of admitting something that society may think is considered weak when it's the opposite. You are strong because we just talked about it.
Yeah.
You
Well, I
know?
mean, the scariest thing we always talk about the concept of being vulnerable. It's one thing not being a victim, but being vulnerable with sharing things
Mhm.
is the scariest thing.
Yeah.
And when you approach fear and you do it anyway, that's the definition of courage.
Yes.
Right. And
Yeah.
so, what man or what boy doesn't want to grow up to be a man who's thought of as courageous?
Yes.
It's just our own internal psyche that thinks, oh man, or Sean's going to think
Mhm.
I'm weaker than I am. And really what it does, guys, it bonds us, right? You have connection with somebody on a real level.
Oh, 100%. And I think, the other thing about it is that when you're vulnerable with somebody, it's an opportunity for you to heal. Okay, I've been through something. I'm admitting, hey, Doug, I've been through some stuff. I'm sorry to hear that, Sean. You're an awesome guy. Yes, you're right. Our bond becomes stronger. I've admitted, I've made it tangible, I've made it real. And I think that's also very scary for a lot of people who've been through whatever it is, abuse or addiction, to really admit it, to give it life. But that's how you truly heal, to become your authentic self. So the five principles that have really helped me, and they started off as just like text messaging to myself, and they started off into journal entries, and they kind of grew into these big mantras, which is really cool. And a lot of them I applied when I was working out. I would just sort of be at the public gym at the time before COVID. I'm working out, I'm thinking about these things, and I would like sort of jot these notes to myself, and then some of my home workouts. But the first thing is what we just talked about, which is accepting your path. Not being a victim. Bad things happen to me. Horrible. I mean, there's unspeakable things happen to everybody every day. You can't even talk about these things. Loss, tragedy, it's just awful. So what's the alternative? I mean, the alternative is that we grow to accept. It doesn't happen overnight. It is absolutely work, and it absolutely takes a lot of self-acceptance. But the idea here is, okay, I've Doug's been through stuff, or I've been through stuff, whatever it is, somebody's been through something. Instead of making it a victim, we want to sort of turn it around best as we can and get to a point. And this is the hardest part. It's the hardest step because it's the first step, but it's the idea of saying, okay, bad things happen to me. Let's say in my childhood. Okay, I need to accept it. What's the next step? The next step then is it all then goes back to worthiness. So
Mm.
I'm admitting, I've been through stuff, I'm accepting it. Now I need to feel worthy because the subconscious brings so much shame, and we make subconscious decisions probably 90 to 95% of the time every day. You don't really make conscious decisions, all in your subconscious. So the idea of feeling worthy is really important. And for men, especially those perfectionists, I have my Wall Street clients constantly say to me, oh man, again, I'll use the analogy. I only did 15 push-ups, Shaun. I'm like, yeah, but you did 15 push-ups. No, 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 it wasn't 20. And the idea is, well, do you feel you're not worthy now? And like, seriously, do you feel you're not worthy? And I said this to a client, do you feel you're not worthy? And the client said, well, no. And I said, well, why are you being so hard on yourself? And then that brought into all these other things that just kept spewing out that really shocked him. And there was a lot of emotion there. So that's the second step. The third step goes back to, again, your mentality of not feeling like a victim, which I agree with, which is empowerment. At any opportunity of the day, you have the opportunity to change it, And, it goes back to me saying to Doug, well, Doug, I've been through some stuff as a child, man. And what if you came back and you said something that wasn't flattering? Like, come on, Shaun, be a man. Or what if you said something to me that I would have to worry about your reaction? Instead, it's, well, even if Doug says something to me, which he never would because Doug is beautiful, but even if you did, the idea is, well, I have the ability to not attach to it. I have the ability to be like, you know what? I'm empowered. I'm empowered. Doug said something to me that wasn't flattering, but you know what? I'm empowered. So that's the third step. The fourth is different because if certain people have been through trauma, it could be childhood trauma, it could be trauma as an adult. You can classify so many things as trauma. Trauma never goes away. That's the really sad, unfortunate part. But I had this analogy in emotional fitness where I was writing about the idea of a stereo, and you can turn that volume down. You can live with it. You can live with it. So, yes, it's always going to be here, maybe in the back of your mind, maybe something just unspeakable happened to you, but it does not have to define you. Easier said than done, but it does not. And the fifth principle, the last mantra, this fifth master mantra, which is a really important one, and to me, it's the most simplistic one, but it's the one where nobody follows. I mean, really, because we're all victims of, I know that's a very harsh thing to say, but again, goes back to self-sabotage that we all experience. And that is being your biggest fan. You wouldn't treat your wife or a business partner or a colleague or a peer or a client the way you treat yourself. You just don't. You don't talk to yourself that way. And imagine if you were kinder to yourself. Imagine if you allowed kindness to lead the way. How empowered, worthy, accepted would you be within yourself?
I
So,
love it.
yeah.
Absolutely love it. And guys, like that, the fifth mantra is if you went around, another way of saying it that we've talked about is if you went around talking to other people the way you talk to yourself, you'd have no friends. Right. I mean, and that goes for most of us, myself included,
Yeah.
and it's a practice, right? I mean, it's not something, Shaun, I'm going to guess that overnight you switched your internal voice
Mhm.
from, to being 100% positive and loving towards yourself. It takes time. At least it did for me.
Oh, 100%. It takes a lot of work. No, 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 no. And I have clients that say to me, you're always happy, you're always positive, you're always these things. And I'm like, well, I've worked really hard at it. I guess I mean, nobody's happy and positive 100% of the time. I do certainly allow myself to feel any emotion I need to. But the idea is that it certainly takes work and it takes a lot of courage to look within yourself. And it will always be, that analogy of pulling the curtain, who's
Mhm.
behind the curtain? It will always be you. It's just, it will always be you, no matter what somebody said or what somebody did. Or I have this principle in emotional fitness about these guidance techniques.
Mhm.
And the first one is visualization. And what I say to a client who's really stuck, and it could be something that's even physical, like, again, I can only do 10 squats, I want to do 15. So just a classic progression overload theory for you. But I'll say to a client, what is a visualization? What are you experiencing right now that's preventing you? What is a self sabotage? What is a self loathing? Can you give me a person, place, or thing? Automatically, everybody always does. And in fact, all the listeners or the watchers could probably think about one person who's hurt them, or a thing that maybe tarnished their confidence, or a place that was not kind to them. And then I really want that person to visualize it, close their eyes, visualize it, and then do the squat or do the push up. And then when you lower down into that eccentric position, when you're lowering down, instead of thinking it as something that has hurt you, harmed you, destroyed your self worth, think about it as something that can befriend you. Take the power away from it. Store it back upon yourself. How do you do that? You take the scary out of it. You don't make it a monster anymore. You befriend it. You befriend it. You have empathy. You have empathy towards your problems. You have empathy towards your former self. It's so important. Give yourself the sympathy. Like you just said, if you walked around talking to yourself that way, you'd have no friends. So start treating yourself that way, to little Sean or little Doug or a former version of ourselves that just doesn't exist anymore. You're not, I say this all the time to clients. Just because you were some way at 5, 15, 25, 35, whatever age, does not mean you have to be that person now. You did not sign a contract that doesn't allow you to progress yourself. You just did not.
Yeah, or who you were tomorrow, yesterday, right?
Exactly.
Or an hour ago, so to speak, in every
100%.
moment.
That's right.
And there's the science of neuroplasticity, right? So
Yes.
we train ourselves to be negative. We train ourselves to be positive or whatever it is. And it's just getting those, just like working out, you got to get your
Yes.
reps in. And,
Yes.
and you don't always do it perfectly, but you keep progressing time and time again. And that's how you turn the negativity to positivity. That's how you turn being a victim to the hero of your own story in a
Yep.
sense. And
Yep.
it does take reps and it does take practice, but it starts with the cognition of knowing what you're doing, the optics. You have to look at it first, as Shaun, you're saying,
Mhm.
and then you can make that pivotal change and that shift.
100%. And it is so much work. I mean, I don't ever want to downplay it. Like you said, like, it's not like I woke up today like, I'm going to make that decision to be positive. No, it takes work. But how do you structure that work is so important, because it can be very overwhelming. Like, let's say you're somebody, you're like, okay, you know what? I am a father, I'm a husband, I run a business, or I have a job that, requires a lot of my energy and time, but I have some things that really need to work on to become my best self. How do I even begin? And to that, I would say just give yourself 5 minutes a day. Everyone has 5 minutes. And that could be, okay, I have my pad and paper here. So you could be journaling, you could write a text message to yourself. You could meditate for a few minutes. If you're not sure how to meditate, there's so many great apps online or, on your phone even. But the idea here is that you're doing something for yourself and you're trying to really uncover, what that subconscious thing is or things that have really been hindering you. And if you can just start with 5 minutes and let it build and let it grow, because I know it can be an overwhelming start. To me, it is not only the best work you're ever going to do, but you really don't have a choice. I mean, really, you don't have a choice because the beauty of it all is that and I say this humbly, so hopefully this doesn't come across arrogant, but the pains of like, let's say my past or the pains of me as a child have now been able to help all these men currently. And it was so worth it. And it was so worth it for me to suffer to be able to help somebody else. And so if you're somebody listening and you're like, oh man, I've really been through stuff, or I haven't reached my full self, or I know there's something in my life that's hindering me, and there's emotion that I can't describe that I'm suffering. If you are suffering, because we are talking about suicide, that's how this started. If you are talking about, God forbid, ending your life, then you need to talk about it. And you'll be surprised about how empathetic people can be around you. And if you're not comfortable talking to another man, it could be any female, it could be a professional, it can all be done privately. But it is so important to reach out to somebody to get it out. We were not meant to suffer internally. That's not what we were meant to do. We were meant to share. We're social creatures. We all crave acceptance. It's so important to really always make validation an inside source. That is also a very, very important thing here, but at the same time it is just as vital to get it out. You have to get it out somehow, and getting it out through exercise is how I'm healing people and how I'm healing myself. There are other forms to do that, like I mentioned, journaling and meditation, even going for a walk, texting yourself, but it needs to come out somehow. That process has to start.
Absolutely love it, Shaun. And guys, listen to what Shaun has to say. I mean, emotion is through motion. That's where I get my emotions moving, is through exercise. And I can tell you a difference when I miss it and when I don't.
Yeah.
Shaun, where can guys find more information about you if they want to follow up and learn more about your books and other things that you're up to?
Oh, I appreciate you mentioning that. So the easiest solution would be to go to zetlinfitness.com. So it's Zetlin and then fitness.com.
was absolutely great. And guys that have been following me, I very rarely keep books on my bookshelf, but I have two of Shaun's books right behind me on that bookshelf. And they are absolutely amazing. Shaun, you're an amazing man. You continually give. Guys, follow him on social media. He's got great posts all the time. And he's sharing amazing content, and a truly husband, a father, and a friend, and a professional that works from his heart. And I'm always impressed with you, my friend. So thank you so much for being here.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Doug. Thank you.
Take care.
You too.